Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Questions and Answers. Today is Sunday, September the 1st. I'm having a hard time, coming to grips with the fact that it's September already. Didn't we just, ring in the new year? I mean, I got to close my pool next week. We'll be seeing Halloween candy all over the stores. Probably is already. I saw pumpkin beers in the beer store the other day. All right, we'll be talking about Thanksgiving and Christmas in 2-3 weeks. Can't deal. Anyway, we've got a selection of questions that I've picked out from amongst the 130 plus that were submitted from 2 weeks ago, from the last 2 weeks. So I'm going to see if we can get to these all today. All right. The first question is from Brian Newser. Hey, Pete, still loving the show, still learning a lot. Cool, that's what it's all about, right? Especially enjoyed your recent rant on the state of the music industry in 2019. Great stuff and lots of food for thought. I also really enjoyed your concert review of the Joe Bonamassa show at Bethel Woods, as I saw him about a week later at Fray's Pavilion in Dayton, Kettering area. I'm actually going to Dayton, Ohio in 2 weeks. I have seen Joe a total of 5 times over the years. Always an amazing, stellar, top-notch performance, a truly talented individual. Although I have 3 questions that could be Bonamassa related or inspired, and if you will, and are curious about your responses. Okay, so this first part of this question, excuse me, you mentioned how the pavilion there was not a sellout for the show, although the Fray's Pavilion show was reasonably close to a full house. I didn't have noticed that the audience tends to be an older crowd, 35 to 70 age range, possibly with a few exceptions, and Bonamassa tickets are usually not what many would consider a bargain price range. I paid almost $90 to sit within the last few rows of the balcony of his performance in Columbus in 2018, although the performance wasn't always and is always well worth the price. Do you think that his show attendance in some areas are directly affected by the ticket prices, especially to those who are retirees, etc.? It's a great question, and I've had that conversation with a few people over the last couple of years. I have found that tickets to Joe Bonamassa concerts are fairly expensive. Considering other acts, similar type acts. The tickets that I bought for the Bethel Woods show, which generally speaking, most Bethel Woods show tickets are fairly reasonable. Now, the first inkling that something was a little amiss was that they were not selling lawn tickets. Now, I don't know if they made that decision not to sell lawn tickets for this show because, A, Joe didn't want to, because lawn tickets at Bethel Woods are usually $38, $40, $50 max, right? Maybe that was a little too low for what Joe normally likes to work at with the venues for ticket prices, or there were no lawn tickets available because they anticipated not selling many tickets to this show. All right, which in actuality, that's what happened. So I wound up getting 3 tickets for the end of the pavilion, the back end of the pavilion, what you would normally, I guess, consider rear orchestra in a normal venue, but this was an outdoor venue with a roof. And so we were near the back, perfect seats. I've sat there hundreds of times before. And those were like $85. Okay, that's pretty pricey for Bethel, especially for seats near the rear of the pavilion. Okay, when I got tickets to see Joe a year and a half ago, now almost 2 years ago, in New York City at the Beacon Theater, those tickets also were close to $100, and I bought tickets all the way up top. So pretty pricey. Another factor here, this show that I saw was on a Thursday night. I have noticed in this area, older people, I'm talking, 40 and older, tend to not go to concerts during the week. Weekend shows, different story. So this was a Thursday night, not well attended at all. I had anticipated this was going to sell out, at least the pavilion, not even close. Same thing happened with the Yes and Asia show just a couple of weeks before it. It was during the middle of the week. There was no one there. Actually, no, the show was a Tuesday. Regardless, it was in the middle of the week, right? Both shows poorly attended. And the Asia Yes show, the tickets were dirt cheap for that, so they couldn't even give those away, which was kind of crazy. But the other factor, too, is that Joe is playing 3 nights at the Beacon Theater, I think, in early November. And from what I understand, I think those are sold out already. So, there you have it. I think the city people who want to see Bonamassa know he's going to play at the Beacon every year, or maybe even the Radio City every couple of years. So they're just going to go see him right there. Why travel all the way up to Bethel, New York during the week when you got to work, when you can go right after work, just hop on over to the Beacon Theater, check them out one night, 2 nights, or all 3 nights, right? So I think that's what it was. I think that, around here, are there a ton of Joe Bonamassa fans around here? I don't know. Most people I talk to around here, they don't know who the hell he is, right? Even though he's been like a major star on the blues and rock scene for quite a long time now. But to city people, New York City, they're pretty hip to Joe Bonamassa. So a lot of factors there. All right, part 2 of Brian's question. I know that his motto is always on the road, plus his involvement with Black Country community and his collaborations with other artists like Beth Hart, etc. Do occupy a lot of his time and talent, but it seems to me like he seems to release a somewhat excessive amount of live recordings, in my opinion. While there is truly nothing like hearing or seeing Joe's talents and guitar virtuosity in a live setting, many of these releases have repeats of songs just performed in various different venues around the world, with the exception being the British Blues Explosion and Muddy Wolf at Red Rocks. I know that you are not a fan of album or song downloads, but I recently took advantage of a half-off sale on digital downloads of many of these live albums from his website, just to add them to my collection, although not paying the higher price for the physical product, since many are, like I stated, repeated songs from studio albums just performed live yet again. Would you rather see him release the occasional studio album of new material instead of these continual live albums? You know what? I don't have an issue with the live albums, and I'll tell you why. Because if you don't go see Bonamassa live, all right, and maybe you don't have all of his studio albums, or very few of them, every live album that he releases, and he generally releases one a year or one every other year, there's not repeated songs from live album to live album. Okay, whereas a lot of the bands that relieve a lot of live albums, you can name them, every live album has like mostly all the same songs. Like, how many times are we going to keep hearing these same songs over and over and over again? I have most of Bonamassa's live albums, and hardly any of them repeat songs from live album to live album. So while the live albums, of course, are based on the tour that he just came off of, if you're someone who doesn't go see him live, that's pretty cool, right? You get a live album for each tour. You don't have to go pay the money to go see him. If you're not really into traveling to, or going out of your house to see a concert, you can go buy the live album. So I personally dig his live albums because they're all different. It would be one thing if he released a live album every year and on every album is the same freaking songs, but that's usually not the case with him. So I don't have an issue with that. I don't have an issue with it at all. And part 3, like I said, I believe that Joe is a truly gifted and exceptionally talented artist and performer, even though he has made mention of retirement in the near future recently. Oh, I didn't hear that. Has the ability and presence to stay for the long haul. I, for one, have a partial fondness for the blues as well as blues rock, and can see many of those artists growing older, still performing this great music without looking sad, pathetic, bloated, and bored, unlike many other genres of music, especially hard rock and heavy metal. Some bands seem to be trying so hard to hold on to the wild sex, drugs, and rock and roll image as they age, and it ends up just looking silly. Do you feel that certain genres of music, and mainly those who perform it, tend to age well into their genre more than others? Well, the problem is, you talk about metal and hard rock. There's a lot of image-driven factors there. Okay? So, metal, for instance, the long hair, the bared chest hair, the muscles and the swagger and whatnot. And, not everybody ages well. Look at Vince Neil from Motley Crue, for crying out loud. That guy is a mockery of what he used to look like. And he still goes out there thinking he's, 25, 30 years old. He's put on 50 pounds, if not more than that. He wears the shirt open, his guts hanging out, his hair is all thinning, and what little he has of it. He can't sing anymore. Half the time he sounds like he's going up on stage, he's loaded, and he's forgetting lyrics. And it's, it's a travesty. Stephen Pearcy going on stage, loaded half the time, based on a lot of clips I've seen from Rat. You get guys who, don't have the voice anymore. I love David Coverdale to death. He's not the singer he used to be, but man, he still puts on a great show. And he's got a band, a hot band who also sing great backing vocals, so they help him out, they complement it, right? But Coverdale still has the look, all that kind of stuff. So it's hard for some of these guys. Whereas, you talk about some of these blues musicians, Joe Bonamassa, he could keep doing this for the next 20 years if he wanted to. He's still a young guy. He's only in his 40s, right? He's not, he already, Joe's got the receding hairline too. Joe looks a little bit older than he actually is. My parents were shocked when I told them how old he was. They thought he was older than me. They're like, no, he's younger than me. So, I think, but Joe is going to get to a point, because Joe tours relentlessly relentlessly. And I think that's why, I think Joe could probably, and again, he probably has made a lot of money. You say what you want about Joe Bonamassa. He has done well for himself because he works his ass off and has for many, many years. Okay, he markets himself well. He tours all the time. He's done a lot of different projects, and he releases live albums, and he releases product all the time. So he makes money all the time. He has spent a fortune on gear and equipment and, vintage instruments and all that kind of stuff, but obviously he's got the money for it, right? I think Joe Bonamassa has really steered his career very well, and he's doing very well for himself. And if Joe Bonamassa wanted to slow things down 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think he'll be able to do that. I hope he doesn't retire because I love listening to him and watching him. I'm a big fan. So, but we'll see how it goes. And Brian finishes this up. Keep up the great work. And by the way, thanks for the heads-up recommendation about the Marcus King Band. I had heard of them, but not really giving them a listen. I saw your review, bought the CD, loved it, and bought their other CDs as well as their digital EP and a free live download. Hoping they head to Ohio soon. Thanks again. Sincerely, Brian Newser. Thanks. Well, we can thank one of our other viewers for turning me on to Marcus King Band many, many months ago. And then my buddy, Chris Canzaneri, who actually, really got me to start listening to Marcus King, and now I can't get enough of the guy and his band. So, next question from Dave Swallow. Whitesnake, pre-87 or post-87? My favorite lineup was definitely the Coverdale, Moody, Marsden, Lord, Pace lineup. Live in the Heart of the City is first class and does not get the recognition of one of the greatest live albums. It exudes energy with everyone at the top of their game. Also, Ready and Willing album or Come and Get It? That's a great question. Both those albums are great. Maybe Ready and Willing? Ready and Willing's a great album. One of the unsung Whitesnake albums, but Come and Get It is awesome too. As far as like which, well, if you're saying pre-87 still includes John Sykes, okay, because he was in the Slide It In tour, and post-87, all right, so post-87, here's how I'm gonna mess with this because I love the 1987 album, the self-titled album, love it. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. But once that album was released, that lineup on that album is gone, right? So that was the whole Vivian Campbell and Adrian Vandenberg thing, and then Steve Vai and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go pre-87 here because that's going to include 87. It's going to include the Slide It In stuff, Ready and Willing, Come and Get It, all that kind of stuff. So that's how I'm going to cop out on that answer. I love Whitesnake to death, but I love a lot of the new Whitesnake stuff quite a bit. From Nick Usofian. Hey, Pete. Let's see. You mentioned recently that you hunted down Live Magnetic Air by Max Webster on CD. He says it's $50 used on Amazon. Yeah, I actually, where did I get that? I bought that on Discogs for less than that, but it was still like, I think, $30, $35, something like that. It would be interesting to hear some stories of ones you've searched for over the ages where you discovered them and more expensive ones, etc. All right, so Nick is basically asking what are some of the more expensive CDs, like out of print stuff that I've actually gone to find. More recently, the German like hard rock / prog band Gift from the early 70s. I had a hell of a time trying to find their debut album on CD, and I finally tracked it down. In fact, you guys saw it on the most recent Forgotten Favorites show. I recently tracked that down. I believe, I got that on Amazon because I had found a copy that was hard, and they were going for like $80, $60, something like that. And I was like, I'm not spending that. But I had it in my cart anyway, and then it was gone. Someone sold it. The seller sold it. And I was like, crap. So I kind of left it in my like wish list thing or whatever it is. It's in your cart, but it was saying that this is currently not available. And then like, I don't know, like a month later, I was looking down in some of the stuff I had in my want list, my cart, whatever, on Amazon, and I saw someone had it for sale, and it was like, I think it was like $40 or something like that. And I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna, because I couldn't find it anywhere. You couldn't find a CD on Discogs, nowhere. Nobody was selling it. None of the Japan sites, nothing. So I was like, you know what? Bloop, scoop that up. Some other ones. Those two Black Sheep albums. So that's Lou Graham's bands. From upstate New York before he joined Foreigner. Really good stuff. So those were out of print forever. And then all of a sudden, I found them. Was it on Discogs? Yeah, someone had put them on CD recently on Discogs, and they weren't cheap, but they weren't that expensive. But I was like, got to get those. The Max Webster Live, obviously, you know about that. I've been searching for that for years. How about with Wet Willie Drippin' Wet? Wet Willie's great live album from the 70s, from the late 70s. I've been searching for that one for ages. It's been out of print. And I think I found a copy of that. Some guy on Amazon put it up for sale, a used copy. And it wasn't cheap. That was also, I think, like $40 or $50. And then another one fairly recently, so that band Weed like the weed, German hard rock band that got together with Ken Hensley in the studio to record an album that sounds just like Uriah Heep. In fact, this was right around the time that I think Ken had some time off from Heap. It was early 70s, right? I think Heap's first album or second album they were recording, and he went and hung out with these guys, the German band Weed, and actually sang and played Hammond organ on the album. That thing's been out of print for a million years. And I was searching. I saw some used copies in excess of $100. I'm like, I'm not paying $100 for this. And then I found found like a Russian label, okay, that had released it. Whether it's official or not, probably not. But I didn't care, and it was only like $15. And I was like, I'm buying it. And it sounds great. It looks fantastic. Whatever. So that's a few of them right there. From Arnaud B. Hey, Pete, I know that you have a fondness for bands with strong bluesy overtones. So what's your take on the more traditional blues like Muddy Waters, Robert Johnson, Willie Dixon, B.B. King, and so on, considering that they influence a lot of bands that you love so much? I mean, I don't listen to a lot of that old stuff, but I do I have some B.B. King stuff. I got some Buddy Guy, Albert Collins, Mike Bloomfield, some old John Mayall stuff. So, like the Robert Johnson stuff, it's cool to hear, but I just never felt the need to own any of that. Same thing with the Muddy Waters and Willie Dixon stuff. I don't know. It's the production values and the oldness of the recordings and stuff like that. I can appreciate it. I've listened to a lot of it. I just never felt the need to own a lot of that stuff, even though, like I said, I do like the blues. But I'm a big fan of the electric blues and some of the modern blues stuff. Not that I don't like the old traditional stuff, because that's where it all came from, right? I just never gravitated to a lot of it for whatever reason, right? And then maybe someday I will, because Lord knows there have been plenty of things over the years that I didn't listen to much when I was younger and get into later in life. So you never know. But those artists I just mentioned, I have a bunch of things by them. So from Lazarus, hey Pete, 2 questions here. First is, you being an Opeth fan, I would like to hear your thoughts on Therion. Not that they are the same, but they started as a death doom metal band, then turned into a more prog power metal band with lots of operatic choruses. Best album, in my opinion, being Vovin. Then next is Temega Therion. Thoughts? Well, first of all, Temega Therion is not a Therion album. That's a Celtic Frost album. So I think you meant to say something else. Temega Therion is not an album by these guys. They do not have an album called that. Temega Therion is the name of a classic Celtic Frost album. So not really sure what was your other one that you were talking about here, but anyway, my thoughts. I kind of dig these guys. I haven't listened to them in a while. I've seen them live a couple times. They're an experience live on the stage, I will tell you that. But some of my favorites, Thelly's a really good album. Vovin, like you mentioned, is a really good album. De Guile is a great album. I like the 2 albums they released simultaneously, Sirius B and Lemuria. That was kind of when they were starting to become more of a prog metal and power metal, kind of operatic symphonic metal band. And they're one of the more recent ones, Gothic Kabbalah, is actually pretty good too. I haven't listened to, I think they've released 2 since Gothic Kabbalah. I don't think I've heard either one of those. Second question from Lazarus. If you woke up one morning in a parallel universe where either metal or prog did not yet exist, but having the knowledge you have, you could help create the missing genre, which would you prefer to help invent, and how would you start? Oh, Jesus. Well, man, that's a great question. I think if neither genre existed and I already had the knowledge, I was like, all right, I come from a different universe where we have these 2 musical genres. I think it would probably be more difficult to convince people to play what we know as progressive rock and to say, here, this is how we should do this. I think metal would probably be a little bit easier, probably because with my limited guitar skills, I could at least say, hey, this is what we want to do, and I could do pretty well at helping people to learn the concept of heavy metal. Prog rock is kind of a different beast. So I don't know. That's a cool question. That's the best way I can answer it. Probably, metal is easier to explain. It would probably be easier to teach, right? Prog is a totally different thing. Although prog, borrowed a lot from classical and jazz and psychedelia, right? And rock. So I'm assuming those genres in this parallel universe existed because you didn't mention them. So might be interesting to say, hey, did you ever think about combining all these elements into something new? So cool question. From One Ring DHS. Pete, love all things SOT. Great job. I was wondering, what are some of your favorite obscure 80s metal albums? I've never really heard you discuss bands like Omen, Griffin, Jag Panzer, etc. Maybe a show on the topic would be cool. Some stuff that I really liked in the 80s that was just kind of off the beaten path. Cirith Ungol were a really favorite band of mine. I love them a lot, especially King of the Dead. Great album. It seems like I got a hair hanging down here. It's driving me nuts. Omen, you mentioned Omen. Omen, The Curse is a great album. I never owned any of their other albums, but I picked them up in recent years. Good stuff. White Wolf, Canadian band, Standing Alone. That was a really good album. I dug that a lot. Liege Lord, Master Control. A couple of those Liege Lord albums are really, really good. How about Icon? Their self-titled debut, which I loved. And also their Night of the Crime album. Great albums. How about were they Irish? Irish or Scottish? I don't remember. Savage, Loose and Lethal. Great album. And how about Satan, new wave of British heavy metal band, Court in the Act. That's just a few. Yeah, there were tons of kind of like underground metal albums that I had and enjoyed back in the day. From Alan M. Pete, always enjoy the show. Your knowledge knows no bounds. Truly awe-inspiring. Well, thank you. The recent Captain Beyond Yes battle brings a question to mind. Do you mark albums by specific memories? I can recall exactly when and where I was when I bought the Captain Beyond album, specifically because the lenticular printing of the vinyl album cover. You tilted the album cover back and forth, and the Captain moved in an animated fashion. Honestly, I don't usually match up like specific. I mean, occasionally. I remember when the Whitesnake 1987 album came out. And if I remember correctly, that came out at the same time as Exodus's Pleasures of the Flesh. If I remember, it was an Exodus album. But I remember, anyway, the reason why I remember that is because somehow I found out when the release dates of both of those were coming out. And I was going to college in SUNY New Paltz at the time. And I said, I need to drive. I remember it was the release date, and we were having a snowstorm, and I drove my little shitty Chevy Cavalier from New Paltz all the way to Middletown to Steve Keeler's Rock Fantasy store to buy those two LPs. And it took me forever to get through the storm to get there. I don't know what I was thinking, but I had to have them that day, right? So I drove through the storm just to get those albums. So that's kind of, that ties in a little memory right there. And I think I've told the story before about, me hearing Kiss Alive for the first time and then going out and buying Destroyer like the next day, that sort of thing. But yeah, most of the stuff I don't really tie. Sometimes I tie specific songs to things that are going on in my life or whatever, but not so much albums, I don't think. Also, Alan says, I rate the Captain Beyond as a nearly perfect album track to track. Asia by Steely Dan is another perfect album. Hendrix's Band of Gypsies as well, many more. Any others come to mind for you, like absolutely perfect albums? Deep Purple's In Rock, possibly the Burn album too. Okay. Machine Head, I guess you can call perfect. Pink Floyd Animals, perfection. Yes is Close to the Edge. Rush, Moving Pictures. For me, Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti. I know some people don't agree. They think there's a little filler on there. I don't. Black Sabbath's first 6 albums. You could make an exception for 1 or 2 of those Sabbath albums, because it's, like Changes, could do without that song. But for me, man, those first 6 Sabbath albums, hard to beat. Chicago's first 2 albums, perfection. The Who, Who's Next, Whitesnake Slide It In, Genesis's Nursery Crime, Foxtrot, Selling Them by the Pound, perfect for me. King Crimson, The Core, Crimson King, and you could also say Starless, Red, and Lark's Tongues and Aspics, Thin Lizzy, Jailbreak, Santana's first 3 albums. It's some perfect albums. There's a ton more, I'm sure. That might be an interesting show topic, right? From Bongalong, In supporting a band musician by buying their music, where is the best place to buy so as to get the most money to the artist? Or does it matter if you buy direct from the website or Amazon or Discogs or whatever? And this is inspired by your latest rant. You know, if you're buying it from Amazon, if you're buying it from their website, if you're buying it from Best Buy or FYE or whatever, you know, especially as a new release, that's going to go indirectly. It's going to go to the band, right? If you buy it direct from their website, you know, especially non-major bands, okay, which are not selling it through what little retail channels we have left. You know, if you really want to get the band your money, buy it directly from them. You know, I mean, you know, it's a lot of Bandcamp and CD Baby and SoundCloud and all that kind of stuff. There's various ways to buy directly from bands or on their websites directly. So, saying that, if, you know, an album's been out for years, maybe it goes out of print, you know, a lot of the older stuff, I buy wherever the hell I can get it, right? Because at some point, you know, the bands are either not around or they're dead or they're not making money off this anymore. So that's where a place like Discogs comes in handy. You know, Discogs, to try and find like all the old shit is so valuable. The out of print stuff, you know, people basically selling from their collections. All right. You know, eventually, you know, the band eventually, or at some point, got the money from the sale of that initial CD or album, all right? And then someone had in their collection, they decide, you know what, I'm going to part with it. So they basically, you know, they sell it to someone like you or me, and we pay them, and they basically get their money back, right, that they originally bought. So I'm at the point now where I want to support the existing bands as much as possible and get money into their pocket. But there are times where when you can't find it that way, you got to get it where you can get it. And I'll buy it used from someone else, right? So, is what it is, right? From Mike F. Hey, Pete, thank you for what you do. SOT is the best. I had a different question, but instead I just saw that Glenn Hughes is going to the Dead Daisies to replace John Corabi and Marco Mendoza. Probably misspelt that. Yes, you did. My question is, how does this impact the band, and do you see the band maybe going in maybe a different direction like what Glenn has been doing for the last 20 plus years? Also, I love the new Possessed CD that you recommended and the Diamond Head one too. Thank you for what you do. Keep up the great work. I will certainly do so. Thanks for checking those two CDs out. They're really good. As far as the Dead Daisies, I got to be honest with you, I was not in love with the last Dead Daisies album. I thought it was a little lackluster. I was very excited when it came out. It's actually a little heavier than the one before it, and I love the one before that. But the most recent one, man, after like 2-3 spins, maybe 4, I was like, God, there's nothing memorable on here. It didn't grab me like the album before. But kind of that's been like the Dead Daisies mantra. It's like it just basically is going to be a vehicle for whoever's in the band at the time, and, you know, lineup changes is what they do. Having Glenn walk in and replace the singer and bass player, because Glenn does it both, kind of cool. I listened to the one new song. I liked it a lot. I liked it better than anything off the last Dead Daisies album. And I always kind of thought that Glenn Hughes with Doug Aldridge on guitar is a really good match, because I don't know if you ever saw any of the footage from the tour they did together a couple years ago. Doug joined Glenn's band for like a year or tour or something like that, and that sounded great. Doug's a really good guitar player. He works well with really notable singers, obviously Whitesnake and Dio. So I think it's a good match. I think they'll do a good album. Quite frankly, based off the song I heard, doesn't sound that much different from what Glenn has been doing with Black Country Communion and his solo band in recent years. And that's all great stuff. So I'm liking the direction I've heard so far. So I think they're going to do just fine. How long he stays, who knows? But it's a great lineup, right? It's a killer lineup. And just imagine like Dean Castronova and Glenn doing like harmony vocals, because Dean's got a great voice. He's a great drummer. He's got a great voice. He sounds just like Steve Perry. So that's going to be really interesting to hear that. From Spaghetti Lee, the influential punk band The Misfits have reunited with the frontman Glenn Danzig, apparently to honor contractual obligations. They've even booked a live date at Madison Square Garden. My question to you is, how do you feel about bands getting back together for such a blatant money grab? Peace, Spaghetti Lee. I mean, and it is a money grab, right? Because I think, for me, I don't mind if it's a money grab if the band really is into doing it and the fans really want to see it. But how many times, and I don't know a lot about the Misfits, so I can't really say, but they have not been with Glenn Danzig for like a long time, for or maybe they have in recent years. I don't even know. But they stayed apart from each other for many, many years. Glenn obviously had his own band, did very well with that. So, how well do these guys like each other? I don't know. Are they just, if it's a contractual thing, they're going to make a lot of money, and then after that, they're done. Yeah, it's kind of a cash grab, right? But again, in an instance where the band is really into it, it's like, oh, we really want to play together again. We're so looking forward to this. And then maybe, the one-off little tour or whatever, or show turns out to be, more, then you can look at it a little bit differently. But if this is kind of like a one and done thing, yeah, it's a cash grab, and that's what happens with contracts, right? So, like if Gentle Giant were to all of a sudden reunite and do a handful of shows, I can't imagine that, there's not as much money in a Gentle Giant reunion as there is in a Misfits reunion, obviously. But they would have to really, and I'm sure promoters have thrown and offered lots of money to the guys in Gentle Giant, and they have not done it, right? Because they're of the opinion that while it would be kind of fun, one show, two shows would never be enough. The fans would keep demanding more, and that was kind of like a footnote in history for us, and we've all moved on. So, and you got to respect them for that. As much as I would love to see a Gentle Giant reunion, you got to respect that, right? You could say the same thing about Genesis with Gabriel and Hackett and all that kind of stuff. That's a whole topic for another day, right? From Jamie Laszlo, I recently made I made the ridiculous decision of dropping $300 on a 1974 copy of Pat Benatar's ultra-rare single Day Gig. I never heard that. 74, that's early. I'm wondering if you ever made a similar over-the-top purchase on any memorabilia from an artist you love. You know what? I wouldn't say, or not like that, not over the top like that. I think the craziest thing I've done in years, and it's not crazy, but is the amount of money I spent on that new Frank Marino DVD Blu-ray book box set that I just got recently. I'm not done watching it yet, so I'm gonna get my full review. A little pricey, I thought. $100. That's way more than I've spent on any DVD set, whatever, but it's such a nice package. They really did a great job, and I know it's going directly to Frank, which that I'm so probably I totally agree, money well spent. But that's probably like the most expensive thing I've bought as far as memorabilia or release or something like that in quite a while. So I've kind of stayed away from the really. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't. No, never really spent, not anything close to what you spent there, Jamie. From Matty Boy Walker. Pete, what do you reckon is going to happen with AC/DC? All these rumors that fly around and continue to tease us about an album and tour, etc. And if you think Brian is back in the band, will that convince Cliff to come back? Also, who do you think would play drums on the tour, Chris Slade or Phil Rudd? I mean, I don't know. I've heard all sorts of things. From what I understand, it's already signed, sealed, and delivered with Brian coming back for a tour and an album. Quite frankly, in my opinion, what they should do is do the one final album, one final tour with the core guys, all right? So Angus, Brian, Cliff, and Phil, along with Stevie, okay, their cousin or nephew, forget Stevie Young, and do the one last shebang. Sell out stadiums everywhere, release an album, the album's going to sell a shitload, right? And then call it a day. That's probably what they should do, because obviously Brian's, health with the ears and all that kind of stuff, not a good thing. Cliff doesn't want to do much more anymore. Phil's got his issues, right? Well, Chris Slade is a great drummer too, so either one there. Angus is the guy who doesn't want to stop, right? And, Angus can maybe go do some solo albums or something like that, or find something to do. But I think at some point you need to kind of put AC/DC to bed, and I think they should go out with a bang. Just my opinion. From David Pruitt, I was introduced to heavy metal in the early 80s by Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. Both Bruce Dickinson and Rob Halford, in my opinion, paved the way for the genre. My question is, which lead singer would you consider superior over the other? I saw Judas Priest at the US Festival, and Halford became my favorite. Just curious about yours. I mean, I love them both. And they're both great for certain things. But for my money, it's Rob. It's Halford. He's been at it longer. Halford is still a freak in nature, man, and that's no disrespect to Bruce, because I love Bruce Dickinson, and I think Bruce puts on his greatest show today as he ever did. But in my money, Halford is the metal god, and he edges it out for me. From Johnny Perot, I am on several metal forums, mostly American sites, where you can debate about hard rock and metal. There was a question about which band was the worst concert you'd ever seen. In all honesty, I answered Queensryche. Man, you won't believe what people responded to my answer. They wished me all kinds of diseases and even death. Does this happen to you too, and how do you deal with it? I was really blown away. I love your shows, and honestly, I don't like some bands you love, but please have some decency, people. Thanks, Pete. Until next time. I mean, this is the sad aspect of dealing with the internet nowadays and all these forums. I personally, there's very few forums that I go on just because. I mean, I think everybody, because of the internet, has an opinion. Everybody thinks they can say whatever they want, and that the typed word can't hurt feelings or upset someone. I mean, you see this all the time, not just on forums. You see it on Facebook. You see it everywhere, right? You see it on Twitter. I mean, well, I was going to say something about what our president does on Twitter, but I'm not going to go there because I know I upset a few of you last time. But I think this country, or the world, seems to think that everybody we're living in a me generation, and only I'm the only important one. I can say whatever I want, I can do whatever I want because it's what I want to do, and I don't really give a crap about anybody else. So you see on these forums, and I mean I see it from time to time in the comments and feedback on this channel. People attacking other people because of their opinions. It's like, you know what? We all have our opinions. We all like what we like and we think what we think. It's like, you can't bully other people to, conforming to what you think. It just doesn't work that way. And I've seen some ridiculous fights on this channel and all sorts of other places. So I can only imagine what people said, on these forums you're talking about. I personally do not frequent them. Progressive Ears is a prog forum that I have been frequenting for years, and that's pretty cool. But I see some wacky shit going on there too. But it amazes me what people say to others on the internet. It's just crazy. And most of these people would never say that in person. I guarantee you that. Right? But, yeah, I mean, hey, if you saw a bad Queensryche performance, and I'd be curious to see what year you saw them and when was the show? Was it with Tate singing? Was it with, the current lineup? I'd be interested to see, but because every time I've seen Queensryche, they've been awesome. But yeah, I mean, every band has a bad night, right? So, I mean, in fact, it's funny you bring this up because a couple episodes ago, one of you guys asked what was one of the worst concerts I've ever seen. And I said probably the worst I've ever seen was a Poison Rat concert back in like 87 or 8 or whatever year that was. And I got a couple people who were like, oh, you know nothing about these bands. Why? How? I'm like, listen, I went to the show. They sucked. That's all you need to know, right? Poison were terrible. And Rush and Rat were drunk off their ass and sloppy. All right? So I was there. Neither band were good. The worst show I ever saw. All right? If you love those two bands, that's all fine and dandy. Doesn't mean they can't have a bad night out on the road. It happens. It happens to everybody. Right? I've seen some bands that I love who've had off nights. It happens, right? But yeah, what goes on these forums is crazy. That's why I tend to not frequent a lot of these things because it's just people just shouting off and just, putting other people down and saying some really mean shit. And it's terrible. From allmediareviews.blogspot.com. Hi, Pete. Given your love of Deep Purple and Uriah Heep, I'm curious what your take on and how big a fan are you of two modern bands that come to mind that carry the Purple Heap influence. One is Big Elf, especially their early stuff. I remember checking them out in the late 90s per Progression magazine and hearing a very heavy Purple influence. The albums within the last 15 years I'm not as certain about, but given your love of Purple and Heap, they may be right up your alley. Yeah, I've been listening to Big Elf since the beginning. In fact, I've become friendly over the years with Damon Fox. In fact, he's the lead singer, keyboard player, and mastermind behind the band. I actually got to meet him in person finally at one of the Progressive Nation shows where they were on tour with Dream Theater and Zappa Play Zappa a bunch of years ago down in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and Damon and I occasionally share pleasantries online, but a great bunch of guys, great music. If you haven't heard that, I think their last album, I think it was 2014, Into the Maelstrom, very good album. All this stuff is really good. It's like a mix of like Deep Purple, Heap, Sabbath, and the Beatles, and maybe a little bit of the Move. If that sounds like an interesting mix, you'll love these guys. They've got, I think, 4 studio albums and a couple of EPs, so well worth checking out. The other band that All Media mentions is Presto Ballet, who were similar to Big Elf, at least their early records. I am often reminded of Purple. Are you a fan, and what are your favorite albums? Yeah, I love Presto Ballet. So again, I have ties to these guys as well. So Presto Ballet is the prog band put together by Kurt Vanderhoof, guitar player and songwriter of Metal Church. Okay, he's a big prog fan too, so he put together this little side project, and they've got also I think about 4 or 5 studio albums. Peace Among the Ruins is a great one. That's their first one. Relic of the Modern World is one of their more recent ones. Kurt's a great guy. He and I also have communicated a lot over the years because I've supported both Metal Church and Presto Ballet quite a bit in the history of Sea of Tranquility. So two great bands. I highly recommend them. You know, the Presto Ballet band is kind of purplish, a lot of Kansas influences, right? A little bit of Yes. Very good band. Both of these bands are excellent. From Kitten Care. Hi, Pete. Here's one for you I hope you cover. I am a longtime admirer of Deep Purple since the very early days with Hush on the radio in '68. Closely following when Machine Head was brand new, though I never heard this before, which I find kind of shocking. I bought at a thrift store, just out of curiosity, a CD called Jesus Christ Superstar, a huge movie play in the early 70s. I look at the booklet, and no other than Ian Gillan sings on this, the Jesus Christ parts in the book. It talks about him with Deep Purple. This must be referring at the time when he just joins him. Just amazed. I never knew this fact. If I had heard it, it was just in passing and never registered. Certainly not talked about frequently. This movie soundtrack was hugely popular in 1970. Heard a lot about it, but never had an interest in it. Do you have any light to shed on this, trivia details, etc.? Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic soundtrack, the Jesus Christ Superstar soundtrack. I originally got turned on to that back in college by my old college friend Melina Iacovone. Melina, what's up? If you're watching, she knew I was a Purple fan. She's like, "Oh my God, have you ever heard the Jesus Christ Superstar soundtrack?" And I was like, the whole Tim Rice thing and everything. I'm like, no, I said, never heard it, but I know he sang on it. And I listened to it, but I think she bought it for my birthday one day. Bought it for me for my birthday. And loved it. It's one of Ian's best performances, I think. Okay. He plays Jesus Christ, obviously, in the play. But a lot of other interesting people involved. You got that guy Murray Head also singing on it. And he was a very famous actor and singer, musician back in the time. Tony Ashton, Lord and Pace, right? He also sang a role in the film. John Gustafson, okay, bassist and vocalist, who played with Roxy Music and Quatermass, Ian Gillan Band, and Hard Stuff. He's on it as well. And most of the musicians were actually members of Joe Cocker's Grease Band. So it's a very cool album, both vocally and instrumentally speaking, and I highly recommend it to anybody. Really, really great soundtrack. From Daniel Boss, just wonder if you ever saw the short-lived 10-episode series on HBO called Vinyl. Mick Jagger and Martin Scorsese tried to make it work with a big budget, but it never really gained any foothold. I thought most of it was realistic of the record industry in the 70s, but a few sections were a little far-fetched. Any thoughts if you've seen it? Oh, and keep doing these great videos. Love the rants. You are doing so much good for the masses and bringing the more obscure bands to the surface. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're very welcome, Daniel. Yeah, I love the Vinyl, and I was crushed when they canceled it. I had a lot of people that I know around here who watched it and really enjoyed it, and I was like, geez, how could people just not get into this? But I thought it was great. It was a great period piece. Johnny Carnival, I thought, did a great job in the lead role, and I loved all the little references to all the great bands of the day. And if you haven't seen the Vinyl, and if you have HBO, definitely go on demand and check out it's only one season. If you're a rock and roll fan, you'll love it. Like I said, a lot of references to a lot of the big bands of the day of the 70s, the whole rise of the cocaine stuff and all the craziness of the record industry. It perfectly exemplifies what was going on during that era. Highly recommend it. I wish they did more. From Russell Gentile. Pete, thank you for answering my questions and many others. I really appreciate it. I know others do too. Are there any albums or bands you gravitate towards during different seasons of the year? For me, before Halloween, I start to naturally gravitate towards specific bands and music like BOC, Black Sabbath, and Ozzy. After Halloween and before Thanksgiving, I gravitate towards jazz or jazz-based music. I'm not sure why. Do you have tastes that change greatly and distinctly by season like me? Yeah, and I think I've touched on this before. I think in the spring and summer, I really start to listen to a lot more like classic rock and southern rock, hard rock and metal, any kind, like, I'm talking like, standard metal, Priest and Maiden and things like that, good hard rock. And then when the weather starts to get cooler, I'll start to listen to more prog and certainly more jazz. And oddly enough, like black metal. I like listening to like classic Norwegian black metal because it's so kind of cold and frigid sounding and stuff in the winter times. But in the winter and fall, a lot of prog and jazz. But yeah, around this time of year, man, southern rock, classic rock, all for it. From George Lammy. Hey, Pete, off topic. But with you being in the Hudson Valley, I'm wondering if you or any of your buddies saw something unbelievable in the mid-'80s. I recently saw a show where they said that area was a hotbed of UFO activity at that time. You're about my age, so I would guess that was prime Woods Party days. So it's possible you have a good story in you. You know what? I have never seen a UFO. Nobody I know has ever seen a UFO. But back in the 80s, there's a town called Pine Bush, not that far from here, about maybe 20 minutes from where I live. And there was UFO sightings all over the place, constantly during the 80s from that area. I don't know why. But not me or any of my buddies, that I can recall. From Robert Out of Mind X. Pete, the summer and early fall months always bring around the heavy metal progressive rock festivals. Examples are Wacken, Open Air, Graspau, Prog Power USA, Prog Power Europe. There are 3-4 days in length. Now my question is, if you were to put together a Sea of Tranquility festival and did it on a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, who would you book on a Sea of Tranquility festival? All right, how about this? I would do, each day would be kind of a theme. So day one, Thursday, is like classic hard rock and metal bands. Whitesnake, Uriah Heep, Deep Purple, and Judas Priest. Boom. Day two, classic prog acts. Friday, King Crimson, Ian Anderson with his current Jethro Tull lineup, Focus, and Yes. Day three, Saturday, modern prog metal acts. Haken, Fate's Warning, Queensryche, Symphony X, and Dream Theater to headline the whole thing, the whole shebang. There you have it, right? Of course, that would cost a fortune, right? But from John McAlar, hi Pete. You read where bands claim sales in excess of 200 million. Are these based on albums and single sales combined? How valid do you think these claims are? Thanks. I think what they do is they 200 million plus. That's a lot, but that's counting albums, that's counting singles, EPs, all that kind of stuff. So just look at the bands. The bands in this category. Okay, this is 200 plus. The Beatles, Zeppelin, Elton John, Madonna, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, Rihanna. I could not believe that Rihanna was in like 200 plus million category. I couldn't name one song she sings. I'm like, what? She's selling albums? I don't know. That blew my mind. Pink Floyd, obviously, Queen, Eminem, another one. I know he's big, but man, 200 plus? Jeez. AC/DC, Mariah Carey, Celine Dion, Whitney Houston, and Taylor Swift. Ugh. So, out of all that, half of that is rock. All right. And the other half is what you call, whatever you call it. Dance music, pop music, whatever. Nonsense. Out of this whole list, man, I was surprised that Rihanna, I knew Eminem, I know Eminem is big, but I was kind of surprised he was up there as well. Mariah, yeah, I guess. Celine, yeah, I guess. Whitney, yeah. Taylor Swift surprised me. She hasn't been around that long, for crying out loud. All right, that's the end of the show, guys, but one thing I did want to bring up. So, maybe a month ago, someone asked a question wanted to know, like, how many of our viewers are actual, musicians, okay? And we ran a little poll up over the last month on the channel to see how many people who come to this channel are either a professional recording and or gigging musician, how many people play an instrument but just for personal pleasure, and how many people do not play an instrument at all but just love music, right? So we had a total of 514 votes, all right? 13%, very little, are actually professional recording and or gigging musicians. 46% play an instrument, but just for personal pleasure, kind of like me. And 40% do not play any instrument at all, but just come here because they love music, right? So it's a shame we didn't get more people voting, because it's actually a very small portion of our overall subscribers, which, by the way, we should be hitting 8,000 probably today, all right? We're just about at 8,000 subscribers. We crossed over 1.3 million views the other day, and we're already marching towards 1.4. So this drive, I'm wanting to get to 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and I definitely think that's going to happen, because now it's like we're getting like 1,000 like every month and a half or so. So keep telling people all right, and let's hit that 10,000 mark, and let's push these views to 2 million, right? So the more the merrier. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're on YouTube off and off and off. And thanks for spending 48 minutes with me today. See you later with more stuff, right? Take care, guys. Bye-bye.